You're only taking the words and not the spirit of what it's really saying, which is the contextual meaning that anyone with common sense would understand. Now, there's no doubt that 2,000 years ago when Yeshua said this, he would have been accused by the Pharisees of adding to the Torah. Because they said, it does say, by my name. And if you tell me I can't swear falsely by Jerusalem, where does it say that in Scripture? Now, to anyone who uses their common sense, to the simple Israelite shepherd or farmer who comes and hears, you shall not swear falsely by my name, it's obvious that you can't swear falsely by other things as well. That's obvious. But to the Pharisees, that's not so obvious because to them, Scripture is a divine code. And Yeshua wanted to make it very clear that he's not adding to Torah. He's just bringing out the underlying Torah principle. And that's why he ends his statement saying, anything added to this is evil. He wouldn't add anything to the Torah because that would be evil. And this is simply a paraphrase of Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 2. Do not add anything to the Torah or take away. And Yeshua is simply reiterating this basic Torah principle. Now, what we have in the Greek Matthew, like it or not, is an abolition of vows. Jesus is coming along and abolishing vows. You're forbidden to swear by anything. That's a fact. That's what he says there. In the Hebrew Matthew, on the other hand, we have an abolition of false vows. That's a very different message, isn't it? A very different statement. He's not abolishing vows, he's abolishing false vows. And really what we see is the Greek Jesus, as he's called in the Greek Jesus, is abolishing entire Torah commandments. Don't worry about adding to the Torah. Obey whatever the Pharisees tell you to do. And don't worry about making... Don't worry about vowing in the name of the Creator. Don't vow at all. That's what I'm telling you. Don't swear at all. Whereas we've now uncovered Hebrew Yeshua, the words of Yeshua as he's portrayed in the Hebrew, and there he's upholding Torah. He's saying their claim to authority as they sit in the seat of Moses, do as Moses says, do as he says. And they're telling you that you can jump through these loopholes and swear falsely. No, that's not the point of the commandment. The point of the commandment is not to swear falsely at all. Not to swear falsely. Now, you as believers need to make a real decision, you have to ask yourself a question. The Greek Jesus is changing the Torah, adding, taking away, abolishing, modifying. The Hebrew Yeshua is upholding the Torah. You need to make the decision and ask yourself the question, who are you going to believe? You can't just ignore the Greek and you can't just ignore the Hebrew. They're both there. You need to make the real conscious decision, who are you going to believe? Are you going to believe the Greek Jesus that's changing Torah or the Hebrew Yeshua who's upholding Torah? And by the way, I don't want anyone to walk away from here tonight and says, Nehemia claims that there were two people who walked the earth and taught 2,000 years ago, one named Jesus, the other named Yeshua. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the way his words are portrayed in the Greek is fundamentally different than how the words are portrayed in the Hebrew. And you need to decide which one of those statements you believe, what's portrayed in the Greek or what's portrayed in the Hebrew. Let me help you out with that decision there. Let's look at Hebrew Matthew chapter 23, verses 16 and on. And there Yeshua is speaking to the Pharisees throughout Matthew 23. And there he says to the Pharisees, woe to you, you blind chairs. You can look in your Greek and you'll see it says, woe to you, you blind guides. In the Hebrew, he says, you blind chairs. Remember in Matthew 23, verse 2, he said they sit in the seat of Moses. And now he's calling them the blind chairs. Yeah, you're sitting in that seat, but you're blind chairs. Woe to you, you blind chairs, who say that he who swears by the sanctuary is not obligated. Does that sound familiar? Swear by the sanctuary is not obligated. In other words, if you say, I swear by the temple in Jerusalem, you're allowed to lie because you haven't used the name. Who say that he who swears by the sanctuary is not obligated, but he who vows by anything is sanctified to the sanctuary building is obligated to pay. Meaning if you make a vow to bring something to the temple, then you have to pay it. Well, that's very convenient, isn't it? Madmen and blind men, which is greater, the sanctuary or the thing which is sanctified to the sanctuary? And you say he who vows by the altar is not obligated. But he who vows to bring a sacrifice must give it. Meaning if you say, I swear by the altar in Jerusalem, then you're allowed to lie because you haven't used the name. But if you swear to bring a sheep to the altar, then you have to give it because some of the priests were Pharisees and the Pharisees have got to eat. So it's a simple economic consideration. Which is greater, the sacrifice of the altar, the sanctuary, or the sacrifice? And this next verse, verse 20, is really, I think, the decisive verse. There he says, he who swears by the altar swears by it and by all that is in it. So here he's actually upholding vows. Now what happened to if you make a vow by anything, you're from the evil one? That's not here at all. That's not reflected at all. He's saying if you make a vow, you must keep that vow. You must not swear falsely. Now, the reason this is so significant is because in the Greek, in the very same verse in Greek Matthew, he says, therefore he who swears by the altar swears by it and by everything on it. In other words, in the Greek, he's saying the exact same thing as he's saying in the Hebrew on this particular verse, upholding vows. Meaning that in Matthew 23, 16 to 20, both in the Greek and the Hebrew, Yeshua is saying no to false vows, yes to true vows. Well, what happened to anybody who swears is from Satan? That's not being reflected here even in the Greek. So let's summarize what we have here. Against vows, we have Greek Matthew 5, and by the way, Greek James 5:12, which is a paraphrase of Greek Matthew 5. In favor of vows, we have the Torah. That's a pretty significant one. We have Jeremiah 12:16, Hebrew Matthew 5, Hebrew Matthew 23, and then even Greek Matthew 23. So what you can see is the Hebrew, or the Greek, the Hebrew is consistent with itself and it's consistent with the Torah. He's against false vows, in favor of true vows, whereas the Greek is not even consistent with itself. In Matthew 5, he's against vows altogether. In Matthew 23, he's upholding vows. So the Greek is not even internally consistent. And you need to make the decision, who are you going to believe? The Hebrew Yeshua, how Yeshua's words are portrayed in the Hebrew, or the Greek Jesus, the way he's portrayed in the Greek? Now, everything I talked about up till now is described in much greater detail in my book, The Hebrew Yeshua versus the Greek Jesus. Now you understand the title, that the way his words are portrayed in the Hebrew is different than how they're portrayed in the Greek. And now I want to talk about a few things which are not discussed in my book, but they're going to be discussed in my next book, which I'm writing right now. And the first thing I want to talk about are the manuscripts of Shem Tov's Hebrew Matthew. And one of the things that we find is that Hebrew Matthew was published in 1987 along with an English translation. And when it was published along based on 9 manuscripts. And of those 9 manuscripts, you find that over time, the manuscripts go through a process called assimilation. Assimilation to the Greek. And what that means is that they start out very different from the Greek, and over time, a Hebrew scribe comes along and says, wait a minute, that's not what it's supposed to say in the Hebrew. That's not what it's supposed to say in Matthew. And why does he say that? Because he's read the Greek. And what he ends up doing is changing the Hebrew to match the Greek.